Hello everyone. Pre-calc lesson 58. We have the distance from a point to a line and narrow and wide parabolas. So the distance from a point to a line, we measure, so here's my point, here's my line, the segment perpendicular to the line that connects the point and the line, right? What's that saying? The shortest distance between 2 points is a line, okay? So we are finding first this perpendicular segment, and then we find the point. So here's our process. You find the equation of the line containing the perpendicular here. You find the coordinates of intersection here, and then you use the distance formula. So let me show you. We're finding the distance between -3, 5 and y equals 1/2 x plus 1. So I need to find my perpendicular line to this. It means it has a negative reciprocal slope, so I'll have -2x plus b. Okay, and I'm going to plug in this point to solve for b. So I'll have 5 equals -2 times -3 plus b, which gives me a +6, so b is -1. So my line is y equals -2x minus 1. So I have my regular line and I have the line perpendicular to it. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to set these two equal to each other to solve for x. So I'm going to say -2x minus 1 equals 1/2 x plus 1. Okay? I'm going to add my 2x over. I'm going to subtract 1. So I get -2 is, now I do 1/2 plus 2. Please don't have mixed numbers. Mixed numbers are silly. We don't use them anymore. We use 5/2 x. So then x is -4/5. Okay? That's the x coordinate of where my lines intersect. I'm going to plug this x coordinate in to my perpendicular line to find y. So I get y is -2 times -4/5 minus 1. And I get that y is 3/5. So now I'm going to find the distance between -3, 5 and -4/5, 3/5. Okay, so I use my distance formula. I'm going to do x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. You can plug this whole thing into your calculator as one step. You know what? I'll even show you that. Do the square root of -4 divided by 5. That needs an extra parentheses. -4/5 plus 3 squared plus parentheses, 3/5, parentheses minus 5 squared, parentheses. And all of that gives me about 4.92, which is the distance between my point and my line. Okay? So, make sure you have all your parentheses right. Let's do another one. Distance between y equals -1/3 x plus 4 and -1/5. So, I first find my perpendicular line, y equals 3x plus b. And I use this point to solve for b. So 5 is 3 times -1 plus b. So b is 8. So my perpendicular line, I'll have y is 3x plus 8. Now I set my lines equal to each other. -1/3 x plus 4 equals 3x plus 8. I'm going to add my 1/3 x, subtract 8. So I get -4 is 3 plus 1/3, 10/3 x. So x is -12/10, which is -6/5. Okay? Now, I'm going to plug in this x into my perpendicular line to solve for y. So y is 3 times -6/5 plus 8. And I get y is 22/5. So now I'm finding the distance between -1/5 and -6/5, 22/5. So my distance is, do -6/5 plus 1 squared plus 22/5 minus 5 squared. Again, you can plug in that whole thing into your calculator and you'll get 6, 3. So that is the distance from a point to a line. Now let's talk about parabolas, narrow and wide parabolas. So we have talked about vertex form of a parabola before, y equals x minus h squared plus k. And now we're going to have this a coefficient. Now what a does is if a is greater than 0, our parabola opens up. A is less than 0, negative, our parabola opens down. If the absolute value of a is greater than 1, then our parabola is narrowed. And if the absolute value of a is less than 1, our parabola is widened. Okay, so narrow parabola, wide parabola. Okay, now we are going to be graphing parabolas. So steps for graphing: write the equation in vertex form. Determine the axis of symmetry and the coordinates of the vertex if it's up or down opening, and a symmetric point, just like we normally would do. Okay, so here's my equation. I have 3y minus x squared plus 2x plus 5 equals 0. Okay, the first thing I want to do is I want to isolate y. So I'll get 3y is x squared minus 2x minus 5. And I'm going to divide everything by 3. So I get y is 1/3 x squared minus 2/3 x minus 5/3. Okay, now completing the square, much easier. I'm going to factor out a 1/3 from these two terms. So I get y is 1/3 times x squared minus 2x. And I'm going to leave the 5/3 here. This is just like what we do when we have a negative, right? We just factor it out from those first two terms. Now I complete the square. I have b over 2, b over 2 squared. This goes in parentheses, that's we plus or minus. So b is negative 2, divided by 2 is negative 1, squared is 1. So I'm going to add 1 here. I'm going to subtract 1/3 times 1, so I'm going to subtract 1/3. Now I factor, so I get y is 1/3 times x minus 1 squared. Here I'll have minus 5/3 minus 1/3, gives me minus 6/3 or minus 2. Okay, so my axis of symmetry is x equals h, x equals 1. My vertex is 1, negative 2. So I'm going to start graphing those. So I'll have 1, negative 2. This is my axis of symmetry. I need to find another point, so go back up here. I'm going to plug in 0 for x. So I get 1/3 times 0 squared minus 2/3 times 0 minus 5/3. So I get y is minus 5/3. So I have the point 0 minus 5/3, which puts me about here. And then here's my opposite point. So here's my parabola. Okay, I found my vertex. I found my axis of symmetry. I know that my parabola is facing upward. And I know that my A is less than 1, which means that it's a widened parabola. And we see that my parabola is quite wide. Okay, let's do another example. Again, I'm going to isolate y here. So I have y is negative 2x squared minus 12x minus 17. I'm going to factor out a negative 2 from here. So I get negative 2 times x squared plus 6x minus 17. And now we complete the square. b over 2, b over 2 squared. This is parentheses plus or minus. My b is 6 divided by 2 is 3, squared is 9. So I add 9 here. I'm going to subtract. I do negative 2 times 9. I'm going to subtract a negative 18. So when I factor, I'll have y is negative 2 times x plus 3 squared. Negative 17 plus 18, I get plus 1. So my axis of symmetry is x equals h, which is negative 3. Negative 3. My vertex is negative 3, 1. I find my other point by plugging in 0. So I have negative 2 times 0 squared minus 12 times 0 minus 17. So y is negative 17. So that's my y-intercept. I'm going to say this is negative 17. And there's my opposite point. And there you go. Now, we know that my parabola is downward facing because this is negative, and we know that the absolute value of a, which would be 2, is greater than 1, so my parabola is much more narrow than that first parabola when it was wide. Okay? So, these are all things that you need to know about parabolas. This is one more step. We're actually going to make it even a little more complicated further along the road. But for now, that is all.